Well, Mortal Kombat's being rebooted again, so I thought, why not take a look at the game that started it all? Mortal Kombat. Not that Mortal Kombat, the other one, the other Mortal Kombat. In 1992, Mortal Kombat hit arcades and became a worldwide sensation, and in 1993 it became a movement. It was a big deal when it was announced that the game was coming to home consoles. In North America, the occasion was marked with Mortal Monday, which spawned one of my favourite video game trailers ever. The trailer is so beloved that they actually remade it recently to help market the new game. The actual ports were pulverising among critics. The version I prefer is the Mega Drive port. The Super Nintendo edition is infamous for its censoring of the violence, severely neutering the iconic fatalities. Sure, graphically it is superior to the Mega Drive version, and is closer to the arcade original, but the Mega Drive Mortal Kombat just gets it right. It gets it so right that it has become my favourite way to play the game. The violence is intact here, but it is locked behind a cheat code. Fortunately, it's easy to unlock, and it means the fatalities are preserved in their pixelated glory. One thing that is different from the arcade version is the music. The Mega Drive port features an all-new soundtrack that I actually prefer over the original. They're catchy and they make use of that signature twang the console's music is known for. Obviously, all of the problems I and many others have with Mortal Kombat are still present here. The difficulty in single player is comical. The fact that there is not one, but 3 separate endurance rounds is total bobbins. Fortunately, the AI is pretty easy to cheese here, especially when compared to the difficulty in Mortal Kombat 2, which is the equivalent of a coughing baby taking on Skynet. Shang Tsung's death is heavily scaled back here, when compared to the arcade original. No longer do all the other characters that he can mimic burst out of him. He just sort of falls over and disappears in a puff of smoke, and the game is beat. I do like the end credits though. Nice to see actual names attached to both the characters and the people who made the game. Not something that was overly common at the time, at least for console games. The controls are as stiff as ever, causing the game to have more in common with the first Street Fighter more than it does the second. The characters and backgrounds are very primitive here when compared to the subsequent games, but I think it adds to the eerie atmosphere this game has. I think the Mega Drive port of Mortal Kombat is a solid translation of the game. A lot of people give it crap for looking worse than the Super Nintendo port, but I think it plays better, which is arguably more important than the graphics. I think the developers did as good a job as they could have. Simply put, the first Mortal Kombat hasn't aged gracefully. There was also a Sega CD adaptation which was more accurate to the arcade game, this time using the original music thanks to the power of CD-ROMs. However, the music is all out of order, with certain tracks playing on the wrong stages. It's largely superior to the cartridge version, but it now features load times, and there isn't that much of a huge leap forward graphically, though lots of stages resemble their originals far more closely. Overall, I'd say the Mega Drive port of Mortal Kombat is really solid, and it's so solid it preserves all of the flaws with the arcade original. I think if you actually want to play the original Mortal Kombat, this isn't the version to play. Nowadays, it's far more of a novelty because the original can be easily obtained through online platforms like Good Old Games, or it can be emulated via MAME. I definitely think the game's cool though, and that's the only thing it's got going for it. You don't really see people playing the original Mortal Kombat competitively. Oh well, Mortal Kombat on the Sega Mega Drive, or the Sega Genesis if you're American, remains an example that Sega does what Nintendo does do. Wait, no, that's not right. Genesis does what Sega does. Nintendo doesn't. Super Mega Drive doesn't do what the Genesis do. Doesn't Sega do what Sega don't. So there's a new Indiana Jones game coming out this year. I think it's about a big circle, maybe a return of the Boulder character from the original film. In the meantime, I felt like I should talk about one of the lesser known indie games. A lot of people talk about the Raiders game for Atari, or the Temple of Doom arcade game, or they'll be talking about the point-and-click adventure games, or the Infernal Machine and the Emperor's Tomb. But today I'd like to shine a spotlight on Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade for the Sega Mega Drive.
And now, without further ado,
let's get into the game. Off to a good start with the title screen. The rendition of the Indiana Jones theme is passable, if a little ugly. The signature twang of the console's sound chip doesn't really work here. Don't ask me why. I just don't like it. I like the level intro, with the reel of film getting burnt out with an old-timey cover of the John Williams theme. It's nice and quaint. Getting into the actual game, I already have questions. Why are we playing as adult Indy? This level is set at the beginning of the film, so logically we should be playing as River Phoenix. Would it have been too difficult for them to have drawn a new character? You could argue that the developers didn't know that there would be a young Indiana Jones featured in the film. Maybe they were working off pre-release material like most movie tie-in games. All valid arguments, but they're all wrong. You stupid bastard. The game came out in 1992, that's 3 years after the film, so why aren't we playing as River Phoenix? Your guess is as good as mine. Whatever, moving on. What happened there? Did I just take damage? I've heard of fall damage, but ceiling damage? This is Indiana Jones we're talking about. A man who's survived torture by voodoo magic and a nuclear blast. But bumping his head is too much for him? It's a miracle he didn't die when he got hit in the face by that mirror. Jumping down from the platform, we kill an enemy and get hit by falling spikes that didn't give me anywhere near enough time to react. Good to know that absolutely everything wants to kill me. How the hell do I open it? The buttons are doing nothing. I have to whip it? Why can't I just press a button like a normal person? This is extra upsetting because there's a whip counter. Why is there a whip counter? Are we gonna run out of whips? Why do we have more than one whip? Actually, maybe having more than one whip isn't such a bad idea.
Give me the whip! Adios, señor.
Are you serious? Not only is there fall damage, there's falling damage? Is it not enough that I take damage when I hit the ground? I know people say that when you fall, you often die before you hit the ground, but this just takes it to a new level. Why in the Christ would you have mid-air damage? And I know I should have grabbed the rope, that's my fault, but mid-air damage? Also, look at how this tiny jump takes off some of my health. It took off such a small amount I didn't even notice. So why take off any health? What the dickens was I supposed to do there? Not jump, but walk off the platform? I couldn't see what was down there. It's in your human nature to jump off the godforsaken platform. Oh great, now I'm getting shot at. Just one thing after another. And the whip can't even reach him. Speaking of the whip, the counter at the bottom recharges, meaning your whips are unlimited. Why even bother? It runs out so incredibly slowly that I'm willing to bet it'll never be a problem. Okay, a small body of water. A puddle, if you will. This will kill me. I know it will. Water in video games like this always kill you for no goddamn reason. It's just a puddle. Sod it. Oh crap, I can't make that jump. That little circle on the pillar relevant? Maybe I can swing across. Well, that didn't work. Oh, fantastic. Now the torch has gone out. Wish I knew that was gonna happen. Now I can't see what I'm doing, which is super dangerous because everything is trying to kill me. How did I do that? So, you have to stand perfectly still at the very edge and whip across. That could have been done to have been more obvious. Finally across. But I can't see anything. Oh. Okay, all I need to do is beat the two enemies in the dark. This isn't even dark. This goes beyond that. It's...
This is advanced darkness.
Okay, we'll start over, now that I know what I'm doing. Alright, back to this bit again. At least I can see this time. Awesome, finally getting somewhere. I'm starting to feel like I'm getting the hang of this game. No! No more! Indiana Jones is dead. He bumped his head.
Can't get rid of Indiana Jones. I'm named after my dog.
Anyone else see that trailer for the new Doom game? Doesn't look overly doomy, does it? Reminds me more of games like Quake, Heretic, and Hexen. Hexen. Come to think of it, I'm pretty sure I've got Hexen, but I've never played it. Hold on a second. Hexen. Let's see what Hexen's like. Hello? Oh, cool. You get to select a character. That's something that sets this apart from Doom. Oh yeah, the reason I'm comparing this to Doom is that Hexen was made in a heavily modified version of the same engine. Hell, it was even published by id Software. Well, I guess it looks pretty good. What the hell? I can't strafe! What? I can't change it? The only control options consist of purely tank controls. You can either use the D-pad or the joystick. If you go for the D-pad, strafing is done by pushing the left and right bumpers. This control scheme sucks. The stick is better, but in order to strafe you need to hold down the Z trigger, which enables this strafe mode. These controls are just terrible, and they have no reason to be. This is the sort of control scheme I'd expect from the first generation PS1 controller, without the analog sticks. Even with that said, this still feels worse than that. Get ready for a tangent here, but I love the N64 controller. This thing is perfect for first-person shooters, and the console had many, yet nobody knows how to use this thing. I often see people bitch and moan about the N64 controller when it comes to FPS games. The reason? They're using the C buttons to move and the joystick to look around. The best way to play FPS games on the system is to assign movement to the left D-pad. The ideal Nintendo 64 control scheme for first-person shooters is to go with the Turok controls, but set it to left-handed, which immediately I understand will look a little off-putting to most people, but it does set it to play with the D-pad for movement, which is much more reminiscent of how controls are now. Yet this method seems to have evaded a majority of N64 users over the last 3 decades. I can't get behind these recent third-party controllers like the Tribute 64 or the Brawler 64 because they put the analog stick on the far left. I can't play FPS games with these D-pads. It ain't right. But I would love to try one of those dual stick controllers. Ultimately, there is nothing wrong with the original controller that came with the console in 1996. That's why I'm so confounded by Hexen fumbling the controls so bad. The D-pad allows for some pretty good simulation of WASD keyboard movement, yet they chose to go with tank controls. It just seems short-sighted of them, especially considering Turok and Doom 64 both came out within months of this game and had way better controls. And so far, this is the only N64 game I've played that doesn't give me the option to play with a control scheme that I personally like. This opening level is pretty weak. Compare Hexen's Winnowing Hall to levels like Duke 3D's Hollywood Holocaust or Doom's iconic E1M1. This level throws too many confusing things at you and goes on too long. Good opening levels in FPS games from this same era were short and sweet, with a relatively straightforward sense of progression. Hexen is one of those where the hell do I go games. The first stage isn't too bad, but some areas are obscured by the muddy colour palette. The level design is a source of frustration. The designers must have attended the Sandy Peterson School of Level Design, where everything must be a labyrinthian nightmare. How dare you mock me like that? The gameplay, tank controls aside, is a bit weak. Depending on what class you choose, you'll start off with your fists. This is too easy, at least at the beginning. It's easy to run up to enemies, hit them, then back off before they get you. Just makes me wish I was playing a game with good melee combat like Condemned. Certain characters begin with a staff, and similar weapons can be collected by the other ones later in the game. There's a decent variety of locations you visit, which are connected via a hub area, so luckily the whole game doesn't look identical. The performance is surprisingly solid, running at a consistent and playable frame rate. The atmosphere is cool too, with sinister music reminiscent of the work Aubrey Hodges did on Doom 64. Gothic stuff, I quite like it. Enemy design is lacking though. I have a hard time describing a lot of them without having to compare them to enemies from other games, or this dude that just looks like the Violator from Spawn. That's not to say that these are bad designs. They complement the world that Hexen is clearly trying to establish, but they aren't particularly inspired or memorable. They comfortably blend into the drab colour palette and don't exactly have that ability to pop out of the background like Doom's roster of colourful monsters do. Hexen for the Nintendo 64 and possibly the PC original fails in my eyes. It just reminds me of other games and makes me wish I was playing them. Maybe this port does a poor job at selling the game, but what little I've played of the PC version, it isn't that different, just obviously has superior controls and frame rate. As an N64 game, it falls completely flat on its face. It has the worst controls of any game on the console I've ever played, and it came out in a year saturated with awesome FPS titles for the system. It's just a tedious and forgettable experience, with a solid enough presentation that it almost makes up for its monolithic shortcomings. Well, that's about all I have to say about this game. I wonder if you can save. Controller pack. This is my least favourite thing about the Nintendo 64. Instead of having memory cards, they came up with these controller packs that are designed to go into the actual controller instead of the console. Oh well, there should be enough room. These early Nintendo 64 games don't take up too much space. I'm gonna say 2 to 3 pages. Ninety fucking pages? No.
Rise from your grave.
Well, that's the last time I played Hexen. Well, let's talk about Altered Beast. What? I can't be bothered to come up with a decent segue. Killbot is now a segue-less show. We don't simply transition to the next matter of discussion here. We're talking about Altered Beast, and if you don't like it, there's the door. Well, that's my door, but I'm sure you can find your door. A port of the arcade original, Altered Beast was among the first games for the Sega Mega Drive. It was even included as a pack-in game in North America upon the release of the console in August of 1989. Altered Beast is iconic, well, at least in my mind. It's among the first games that immediately come to mind when someone mentions the Mega Drive or the Genesis. Why wouldn't this game be awesome? You go around punching zombies and you get to transform into a werewolf.
Shut up and take my money!
Getting into the game, look at this text. I haven't played this in years and I admittedly never got past the first stage, but I never noticed this green text here. They couldn't have chosen a better colour to contrast with the level's colour scheme? The arcade original uses red text with a yellow outline. Why couldn't they have gone with that here? I mean, it doesn't matter because nobody is playing this game for the story. First impressions are positive. The digitised voices are very impressive, especially considering there's a handful of them and the size they'll take up in the game's memory. The game displays the major step up in quality the Mega Drive provided over the NES and Sega's own Master System. It's very impressive for a console from the late 80s. But this is where all the nice things I have to say about the game end. This is something many games of this era suffer from, that being the fact that the developers would typically make console ports even harder than they were in the arcades. Altered Beast for the Mega Drive is still operating under the guise of an arcade game, designed to wrangle coins from your wallet. This was before it was generally accepted that the brutal challenge of arcade games don't translate well into a home console setting where you just have to make a one-time payment. I guess the way they rationalise this is that it would extend the game's length and give the players more time with it. The rigid controls don't help matters much either. Very sluggish, and attacks never feel like they're lining up with the enemies. As you progress through the level, you'll collect pellets that gradually increase your muscle mass, making you look like a weird piece of fetish art. After collecting enough, you'll inevitably transform into the Altered Beast. Ironically, this form is less muscular than the one before it. In level 1 you'll turn into a werewolf, which was the main beast that appears in the game's marketing. By other stages, you'll become a crap-looking dragon, bear, tiger, and a golden werewolf? Every stage ends with a boss battle. Funnily enough, these aren't quite as hard as you'd expect them to be. I was able to beat the third stage's boss without getting hit once, because all you have to do is fly straight into them and spam the heavy attack. After the boss battle, Zordon will appear and steal all of your powers, leaving you with the knowledge that you're gonna have to start over in the next level as your puny human form. Your health doesn't get replenished at all either, making the game even more unfair. Other arcade games released the same year as Altered Beast would at least give you back a little health at the beginning of the next stage. So why not here? So, after having spent my whole life stuck on the first stage, has this venture been worth it? No, not really. Stage 2 is a bit rubbish. It looks like trash and these stupid purple glob monsters fill me with a unique sense of rage. The third stage doesn't fare much better. I like these bug enemies that move like background characters from Smiling Friends. The platforming was frustrating. There are these bottomless pits that are obscured by the foreground art. They're a beginner's trap because how am I supposed to know that I can't jump over that? So, using logic and my advanced skills of deduction, I determine my only course of action is to jump up to those platforms. But I can't fucking reach them! Oh, I have to hold up and jump at the same time? I gotta stop playing, otherwise I'm gonna have another heart attack. Well, Altered Beast is a bit of a disappointment. I built up this game in my head where you play as a werewolf and punch zombies into giblets. And Altered Beast is that game, but there's this other crap game getting in the way. Inefficient controls and annoying enemy placement ruin the experience. Although, I cannot deny how impressive it is. It's an awesome translation of the arcade original, and the newfangled gameplay and graphics were leagues ahead of what other home consoles were offering at the time. Maybe this is a generational divide. Maybe I'm giving up and slagging this game off because I wasn't around when it came out. Maybe I have completely different standards compared to someone that was around in 1989. Who knows? Damn, this review was a bit of a bummer, wasn't it? I suppose the one really good thing about the game is the music, and my favourite track is the Game Over theme. Losing has never sounded so good.
Sorry, I always wanted to say that.
So, I've been getting into the Street Fighter series recently. You know, I've been playing a bit of everything, Street Fighter 2, 3, 6, the expected games. But I found a Street Fighter game hidden among my original PlayStation titles. One, Street Fighter EX plus Alpha. Street Fighter EX was the first game in the franchise to make the jump to 3D, similar to games like Tekken and Soul Edge. Originally appearing in arcades throughout 1996, the game was later ported to the PS1 in 1997 and given the Plus Alpha subtitle, which brings us to where we are now. I'm not overly familiar with the Street Fighter series, but I am a little surprised that I've never seen a single video where someone discusses this game. That's not to say videos on the subject don't exist, I'm just a little surprised that the reputation of the first 3D Street Fighter game is so downplayed. So, why don't we take a look at it and see if there's any particular reason why this game is so forgotten. Booting up the game, you'll be greeted by the title screen, with perhaps the weakest line reading I've ever heard.
Street Fighter EX plus Alpha.
I mean, I'm not sure how you can read that title and make the whole thing sound cool, but come on! You couldn't make the Plus Alpha sound more tacked on than it already is. And the main menu feels a little quiet. Too quiet. Why the lack of music? We're just left sitting in this void, listening to the nothingness. Oh, so this is what death is like. Thankfully, the character select screen has some good tunes to quell your existential crisis with. Not a fan of the weird bar at the bottom of the screen, because it doesn't display every character. Fortunately, there are other screens in the game that do represent the characters' icons in a more traditional Street Fighter style. Getting into the characters, we've got a lot of familiar faces, such as Ken, Ryu, Chun-Li, Guile, Zangief, Akuma, and M. Bison. Dhalsim and Sakura are also included as characters exclusive to the PS1 port. However, EX also introduces several new fighters, such as Hokoto, D-Dark, Pullum, Crackerjack, Kairi, Alan, Darun, Garuda, Blair, and my personal favourite character in the game, Skullomania. I really wish Skullomania would make a comeback in Street Fighter 6's DLC. They technically included him in Street Fighter 5, but that was just as a costume for a largely forgettable character. The game also has some hidden characters, consisting of Bloody Hokoto, Cycloid B and Cycloid Gamma, who remind me of the guy you play as in Cosmic Smash, and Evil Ryu, who I thought for the longest time was a fake character because he reminds me of the evil scary Diller meme. This is certainly a solid roster of characters, with a good number of ones from Street Fighter 2 in the Alpha series, and some brand new fighters that managed to make an impression. Getting into the gameplay, it's very similar to Street Fighter 2, just a little floaty. Unlike other 3D fighters at the time, EX retains the 2D gameplay style and doesn't move it to the 3D plane. This was a wise move on behalf of the developers because I definitely prefer the 2D style. Personally, I feel that 3D fighters lack a certain speed and flow. Not to say I don't like them, I've gotten a lot of enjoyment out of the Soul Calibur series. On a graphical level, it looks nice. Decent 3D models with relatively complex texture work. The animation is also really great because they've made use of motion capture software, which would have been pretty state-of-the-art for 1996. Though the background perspectives are way off. Look at the size of that tree! And look at those monolithic fighter jets. They are the size of skyscrapers. Fortunately, not every stage suffers from this weird scale issue. I don't even mind it because I think it's quite funny. It just makes it look like you're playing with the action figure versions of the characters. The soundtrack is exceptional. I'd risk saying I prefer it over Street Fighter 2's. The track names appear at the bottom of the screen whenever a stage begins, Soul Edge style. Something I despise about the game though is the cover art. Well, at least the PAL and NTSC covers. The Japanese artwork is awesome, both variations. The cover has been done in the usual art style the Street Fighter games were accompanied with in the 90s, but instead we're stuck with the crappy polygonal Ryu. What's more irritating is he's standing in front of the Japanese cover. Move out of the way, asshole! Overall, Street Fighter EX isn't as strong as the other Street Fighter games coming out at the same time. It takes after Street Fighter 2 more than it does the Alpha series, the arcade ladder even culminating with a boss battle with, you guessed it, M. Bison.
Of course!
The game wouldn't have made for a very good Street Fighter 3, although I'm sure there were players back in the day who would have said otherwise, because of the fact that Capcom declined to move from 2D to 3D. As to why this game and the following two are forgotten, I don't have a clear-cut answer. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that EX became a series, continuing with another game on the PS1 and a third and final game on the PS2. I've heard good things about both, with some implying that they're better than the first one. Street Fighter EX plus Alpha is a really good starting point, and that's its downfall. It doesn't excel at anything in particular, it plays well and looks good for the time, but I think it lacks the mechanical richness you would later see in the Street Fighter 3 trilogy. The main reason behind the lack of attention is probably because the Street Fighter Alpha series was still going when EX appeared in arcades, and the Alpha series, or Zero depending on where you're from, are beloved, and people are still playing and talking about them to this very day. Plus, Street Fighter 3's first iteration came out in '97, the same year as EX's PS1 port. EX probably overshadowed Street Fighter 3 at the time, but 3's legacy has proven to be far more enduring, with 1999's Third Strike often being heralded as not only the best Street Fighter, but one of the best fighting games ever made. The EX series came out at the wrong time and was surrounded by games that pushed genre conventions, and was yet another Street Fighter game in what was possibly becoming an oversaturated market. It's a shame people either don't know about or overlook this Street Fighter, because I've certainly had a lot of fun with it. And I definitely plan on getting the other two entries into the series. So, do I recommend Street Fighter EX plus Alpha? Hell yeah! It's simple, but it's very well put together. And it's just really easy to pick up and play, so I like it a lot, and I think you should go and play it. Do you know what day it is? Yeah, it's Vanilla Ice's birthday! But more importantly, it's Halloween. And what you saw before was the opening cutscene to one of my favourite horror games ever made, Splatterhouse. Horror in film has existed since the beginning of the medium, but horror in games took a while to be fully realised. In terms of early video games, there's Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween on the 2600, and the infamous Chiller. There's a lot of old horror games, but these all range from very primitive to kinda crap. But in late 1988, Namco unleashed Splatterhouse into Japanese arcades. It was received very well throughout all the places in the world it emerged, praised for its audio-visual elements, but critics and players were mixed on the gameplay, the most common complaint being that it was too simplistic. Splatterhouse is an immensely important thing to me. It's a cornerstone of all the things I'm interested in as an adult. I was first exposed to it in 2006, and it's among some of my earliest memories. I remember my dad played it in the living room whilst I watched the conclusion to Toy Story 2. I even remember the part he was playing. It was the Boar Worm Room boss. The game left such an impression on me that whenever I see Jason Voorhees, I see Rick, not Jason. It's never the other way around, despite the fact that they knowingly stole the look from Friday the 13th, simply because the designer thought they were making a licensed Friday the 13th game. But that's enough reminiscing for one night. Let's get into Splatterhouse. As seen earlier, the opening introduces us to Rick and his girlfriend Jennifer, as they run towards the West Mansion during a thunderstorm. Why? No idea. I assumed that their car had broken down or something to that effect. The short comic strip that promoted the TurboGrafx 16 port implies that they're there because Rick wanted to meet the mansion's owner, Dr. West. No, not that Dr. West. The game really is towing the line in terms of copyright infringement. Upon entering the mansion, we hear Jennifer scream as they're attacked off screen. Rick has been left for dead, but something else has set its sights on him. Attaching itself to his face, the terror mask revives Rick and will help him save Jennifer. Although a lot of that is left up for you to decipher. There is a story here, it just isn't told. But what is here is meatier than the kinds of stories you'd see in video games of the late 80s. Funnily enough, you don't begin the game in the titular Splatterhouse. You start off in this shed thing over on the right here. Making your way out of the dungeon and torture chamber, Rick approaches the house. At the entrance you encounter the Biggie Man, aka the Piggy Man. An odd case of a mistranslation, but why the hell would he be called Biggie Man? Sure, I think Piggy Man fits less, but what does Biggie even mean? Is it because he's big? Should have called him Large Guy. Inside the house you kill more monsters, followed by a showdown with dusty doppelgangers and an inverted crucifix inside the mansion's chapel. The enemy variety on offer here is phenomenal. All have memorable designs and unique attacks. I especially love the poltergeist boss early in the game, though they're all incredibly irritating, especially the severed hands that flip you off. Eventually, you'll stumble upon Jennifer being tortured by a group of monsters. You've saved her. That's the end of the game. Rick and Jennifer leave the mansion and never return. The end. No, I'm just kidding. In one of the first ever twists in a video game, Jennifer turns into a hulking nightmare monster, forcing Rick to put her out of her own misery. She even reverts back to her human form for fleeting moments and begs him for help. The storytelling in this game is incredible. It all feels so diegetic and cinematic. Well, as cinematic as you can get in a 1988 arcade game at least. After the toughest boss fight yet, we defeat Jennifer as she turns human one last time and thanks you before her soul ascends to another plane of existence. Presumably enraged, Rick makes his way down to the womb of the house and destroys it, somehow starting a fire. Escaping the burning mansion, avoiding flaming logs and monsters as we go, eventually we encounter the final boss, the masterfully named Hell Chaos. This is such an awesome, grotesque boss. No idea what its origins are. I assume it's somehow connected to the womb of the house and is potentially a transformed Dr. West, as though he too was corrupted by the living evil of the house. After defeating Hell Chaos, Dr. West's spirit is seemingly set free. It is such a vague ending that I honestly can't say that's what happens for sure. I don't know if West in this game is a villain or just another victim of whatever whatever was gestating beneath the house. Rick walks away from the flaming ruins of the West Mansion alone, the Terror Mask shattering into pieces along the way. A chiptune rendition of Santo Nel Core plays over the end credits. But before the game is truly over, we see the Terror Mask reform. It isn't over yet. What an ending, seriously. Try to think of another arcade game where the hero essentially loses. So many arcade games of the era fall into that damsel in distress trope, especially games like Double Dragon and Final Fight, which are synonymous for it. But Splatterhouse subverts that expectation and turns the damsel in distress into another grotesque monster for you to defeat. It's a trailblazing subversion of video game expectations. There was nothing else like it at the time. Splatterhouse is an amazing game. Although it isn't without its flaws, the difficulty is legendary. You would have to spend a lot of time with it to learn all the enemy patterns and level layouts. I have no idea how far people managed to get when this was still in arcades. Graphically, it is unlike anything from the time. Horror wasn't a genre that had been executed very well within games, as mentioned earlier. It's an audio-visual masterpiece. The soundtrack is phenomenal. It is some of the best music ever composed for a game. Yet again, leaps and bounds ahead of the vast majority of other arcade games. Players were critical of the gameplay though, which I feel is unfair. The most common complaint is that there's too much style over substance, which results in the combat becoming repetitive, which to an extent is true. The gameplay is pretty bare bones, only utilising 2 buttons for punch and kick. But I believe there's enough variety in monsters with unique attacks and methods for dispatching them, with weapons like axes, cleavers, 2x4s, spears, shotguns, and a single wrench to spice the levels up. It isn't a long game if played from start to finish, taking less than 30 minutes to beat, but if you're playing it the way the developers intended, you're likely to be spending several hours with it.
So, you want to know the story of Splatterhouse, the new horror video game for TurboGrafx 16? They say he stalks the old haunted mansion. They say he's looking for his girlfriend. They say his only weapon against the maggot-eaten ghouls who took her is a 2x4. And you say you want to play this game? Splatterhouse. Only for the TurboGrafx 16 system from NEC.
Splatterhouse has been ported several times throughout the years, the most recent being just last year with the Arcade Archives re-release. The most well-known ports of the game can be found on the PC Engine and TurboGrafx 16. These are relatively straightforward translations of the arcade original, just with the overall presentation being watered down so that it'll run on the console. Most notably, the TurboGrafx 16 port was censored for its delicate American audience. The colour and design of the Terror Mask was also changed, going from a white hockey mask to a red one. I suppose I should talk a little bit about the subsequent Splatterhouse games, but I don't have quite as much to say about them, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about them at all. Released on the Sega Mega Drive in 1992, Splatterhouse 2 sees the return of Rick and the Terror Mask as they embark on a mission to save Jennifer's soul. Rick returns to the ruins of the West Mansion, only to discover a second house. Just roll with it. I'll cut to the chase. I don't think Splatterhouse 2 is as good as the first. It plays exactly the same, and it looks worse. They didn't take advantage of the console's parallax scrolling, with a lot of levels looking really flat. I understand that the Mega Drive isn't as powerful as an arcade cabinet, but it is a stark decline. The difficulty might be even harder than the original 2, which is saying something. But yet, the game is really ugly, so much so that fans made a ROM hack that gives it a slightly more agreeable colour palette. The mask has also been changed again, the Japanese version featuring a simplified and elegant Terror Mask, which I find to be lacking the charm of the original, but I can tolerate it. The PAL and NTSC Splatterhouse 2 has the mask look like a skull. It's lame. No idea why they decided to change it between regions. I like that the horror is more Lovecraftian this time around, with that showing through with the more otherworldly bosses featured throughout. The soundtrack is also also awesome, like the original. Some of the best music made for the Mega Drive. Releasing a year later in 1993, Splatterhouse 3 brought the original Splatterhouse trilogy to an end. This one shook up the gameplay at long last, bringing it closer to beat-em-ups like Final Fight. Splatterhouse 3 has an awesome story, building off of the first two games. The digitized graphics and the cutscenes add a level of eeriness the second game was lacking. Plus, the redesign of the terror mask rocks. It's so good that they didn't even bother changing it for the reboot. It features 4 possible endings as you're timed throughout each stage. The deaths of both Jennifer and your son David lingering as you make your way through the many floors, meaning you need to find the most optimal route in order to save them in time. Admittedly, I'm not keen on the timed elements. I'd rather play at my own pace and explore the many rooms that these floors have to offer. Sadly, despite the gameplay revamp, Splatterhouse 3 loses a lot of the signature environmental hazards. The weapon variety is somewhat lacking too. The introduction of the POW meter is a welcome addition, allowing Rick to hulk out by becoming more powerful. This is an ability best reserved for boss battles. It is graphically superior to Splatterhouse 2, but the music isn't as memorable. I can only really remember a couple tracks, as opposed to most, if not all of them. Splatterhouse 3 is more enjoyable than 2, but it comes up short in a few areas, with the gameplay loop becoming stale the longer you play. I guess I should mention Wanpaku Graffiti before I leave the 2D games behind. Wanpaku Graffiti is a chibi reimagining of Splatterhouse that was released exclusively in Japan for the Famicom in 1989. It doesn't have a lot in common with Splatterhouse aside from starring Rick and Jennifer, serving more as a parody of horror than a homage. We even get Dracula dancing to an 8-bit cover of Michael Jackson's Thriller, which I don't think would have happened in the other games somehow. I actually have this complete in box. I got it for my Christmas in 2013. It even comes with stickers. Crazy to think that this would have likely been in some Japanese person's house back in the late 80s. Now it's in my greasy Scottish hands.
You have one new message.
I'm still in the house. I found a phone. But they're looking for me. I hear them. I think they're gonna kill me. They're everywhere. Help me, Rick.
I'll save you, Jennifer.
After 17 years dormant, Splatterhouse returned in 2010 with a reboot. This game had an infamously rocky development, with developer Bottle Rocket being kicked off of the project by Namco due to creative differences. The end result is a product plagued by frustrating gameplay, level design, egregiously long load times, a weak and tropey story, and they gave Rick shoes! My boy doesn't wear shoes. He isn't even wearing them in the opening cutscene of the original game. He's shoeless before he comes into contact with the mask. Instead, they decide to make the shoes some product placement for some shoes from a brand I've never heard of. I should make it clear that the reboot isn't a bad game, but I didn't enjoy it massively. I find the idea of replaying it kinda repulsive. Not impressed with the handling of Jennifer's character. She's even more a damsel in distress here than she was in the 1988 game. In the various chapters, you can collect pieces of sexy and even nude photos of Jennifer. Why? I'd rather collect concept art or music. You shouldn't be playing a Splatterhouse game to look at tits. You should be playing it to violently tear monsters apart. Maybe instead of wasting time on stupid crap like this, they should have refined the janky gameplay. I have no idea why they thought that Gamebryo, the engine used for Oblivion and Fallout 3, would be suited to a fast-paced beat-em-up. Maybe I'm being so harsh because I'm a big fan. There is a good time to be had here. There are a lot of good vocal performances, cool Easter eggs, and I think the gore is an achievement. This is one of the most violent games I've ever played. The game makers clearly had a love for the franchise. I just wish the game wasn't so scattershot in its quality, and I think the hellish development scunnered Namco from doing anything else with the franchise since. Like it or not, this game killed Splatterhouse. The future of Splatterhouse is opaque. If you want a good Splatterhouse follow-up, try the Splatterhouse 3D WOD for Doom. It has a great atmosphere that's faithful to the original games and awesome FPS gameplay. It's as close as you're gonna get to a new game. There's actually a lot of fan games and ROM hacks to choose from. People evidently still care about this series, and people presumably bought those overpriced vinyl figures from Unbox Industries. And I'm always hearing the Splatterhouse soundtrack popping up in the background of various YouTube videos. I'd take anything from Namco at this point. I'd take a 2D side-scroller with pixel art. I'd take an Unreal Engine 5 remake. They've re-released Splatterhouse a few times over the last few years, which proves that they haven't forgotten about it. Rick has even made a lot of cameo appearances in their other games. And I think it would be great to get all the games in a collection for modern consoles. So, my parting message to everyone is, play Splatterhouse. Talk about Splatterhouse, and most importantly, buy Splatterhouse. Show Namco that we're all still interested, and maybe, just maybe, we'll get a new game in 150 years' time. Now, I'm off to the West Mansion for its annual Halloween party, and you guessed it, no shoes allowed! November 2004 was a damn fine month to be a fan of first-person shooters. Halo 2 graced the Xbox, and Half-Life 2 revolutionized PC gaming. 2004, in general, was a stacked year for games. Too many to even list. I would risk saying it's the best year for games of all time. Just the sheer amount of quality titles, especially in the FPS department. But the PS2 wasn't sharing in the success as much as Xbox and PC were, though. What they needed was a first-person shooter that could compete with the likes of Halo. A Halo killer, you could say. We're talking about Killzone. I was gonna talk about Halo 2, but what is there to say that hasn't already been said? It's one of the best FPS games ever made. Great story and online multiplayer that games struggle to even compete with now. Perhaps it stumbles in a couple areas where they try some new things, particularly the unrefined nature of the brute enemies found later in the game. Doesn't matter, Halo 2 is one of my favourite games ever. So, how can Killzone even hope to compare? Developed by Dutch studio Guerrilla Games, Killzone began life as a generic sci-fi shooter until taking on new life as a sci-fi game that would be heavily, and I mean heavily, influenced by the Second World War. Killzone centers around the second extrasolar war between the planets Vecta and Helghan. There's a lot of lore here that's actually pretty interesting. I love a good sci-fi world to get lost in, and the story of Killzone tells the tale of an epic space opera. Sadly, this doesn't shine through into the actual meat and bones of the game. The opening cutscene sets the scene perfectly. There isn't an opening crawl, but the sharply written dialogue performed by Brian Cox tells us everything we need to know about the oncoming conflict. It also serves as a perfect introduction to the game's antagonists, the Helghast. We learn that the Helghast were banished from Vecta decades ago, the harsh conditions of their new home causing them to mutate in order to adapt, the living conditions breaking the people and allowing a fascist dictatorship to rise from the ashes and ensure that they will have their revenge. They will reclaim the planet they were forced off. The rest of the game fails to live up to this introduction. There isn't any world building scattered throughout the campaign, which is a shame considering there was a fair bit in the marketing, and even the manual is stylized as though it came straight out of the Killzone universe, full of lore tidbits and humorous fictionalized product placements. It feels like a true missed opportunity that the lore doesn't come to anything meaningful. The Helghast can be portrayed as sympathetic, which is slightly hard to believe considering they're space Nazis, and well, they're called the Helghast. They may as well have called them the Bastard Evils. But the conflict is morally grey, just like the game's colour palette. The story is quite pathetic. Intended to be a gritty war movie, Killzone has more in common with something like G.I. Joe. An army of bland and unlikable characters coupled with lame dialogue makes for a real slog of a story. It doesn't help that the cutscenes are rough to look at. They've been smeared with so many filters, it looks as though you're playing through the game in a drunken haze. And they severely waste both Brian Cox and Ronnie Cox here too. That's a lot of Cox. Brian Cox only appears in the opening. Only his character's name, Scholar Visari, is uttered by the supporting cast. I understand that Brian Cox would have been pretty expensive, but they could have at least got him to do some additional lines that could have been dispersed throughout the game. Instead, the story pivots to General Adams, voiced by Ronnie Cox, a Vectan that's sympathetic to the Helghast cause. Gutted that this character is so bland, Adams isn't remotely sympathetic. He's a psychopathic murderer. Yet again, the complex world of Killzone is denied entry into this game. I don't typically care about story in video games, but you'd think that because Guerrilla had put so much time and effort into crafting an interesting sci-fi landscape, that they'd think to include it in the game it was made for. The gameplay doesn't fare much better. The player is given the option to play as 4 different characters, which are unlocked as you progress. Templar, a captain in the ISA, Luger, a Black Ops assassin, Rico, a heavy weapons specialist, and Colonel Haka, a Helghast defector working as a spy for the ISA. He's also voiced by Sean Pertwee, and unlike Brian and Ronnie, he isn't totally wasted in the narrative. These characters have a few unique abilities that set them apart, but you'll want to stick with Rico as he can stomach the most damage and is equipped with a chain gun which has a plentiful supply of ammunition. Plus, it doesn't need reloading. Combat itself is a mixed bag. There isn't any aim assist, which is a pretty bold move for a console shooter. Even bolder considering the game has a frame rate as smooth as Doom on the Super Nintendo. It gets harder to play the further in you get. The environments in the latter portion of the game are these big wide open spaces with fog so dense that it gives me flashbacks to games in the N64. These environments also murder the frame rate. Compared to the early game missions, they pale in comparison. The beginning of the game consists of war-torn cityscapes and industrial districts. Encounters with the Helghast invaders are, for the most part, close quarters here, meaning the frame rate is stable and you won't have as much difficulty aiming. The best combat sequences are found inside buildings and spaceships, not the outdoor locations that Killzone spends a majority of its time in. This allows the game's combat to shine through, and it's actually pretty fun. Not as good as Halo or the many other FPS games floating around in Killzone's orbit, but solid enough that you'll actually enjoy what you're doing. Although explosives are oddly ineffective, weapons are punchy, and the design of the Helghast infantry works well. The image of their silhouettes marching out of the smoke is somewhat striking, the only visible part of their bodies being their angry red eyes. Graphically, Killzone is a tad head-mincing. Character, weapon, and vehicle models look amazing, almost the same quality as an early PS3 game. Levels, on the other hand, range from reasonably impressive to impressively putrid. As usual, the indoor environments have aged better. They aren't lit as flatly as the multiple beaches and jungles you'll be traversing. The game was marketed as a true graphical powerhouse in 2004. Specific elements are indeed impressive, but the abundance of ugly post-processing effects make the game even harder to look at than it already is. The AI isn't particularly bright either, often taking their sweet time in noticing that you're standing just a few meters away. There are so many concessions made that the game isn't technically impressive. All the compromises make for a lesser experience. In what I can only assume to be a limitation of the engine or the hardware, music does not play during gameplay. I'd argue this is the game's biggest flaw, as the music is epic. You can hear it play in the background of all the cutscenes in the opening, but never while you're playing. Killzone doesn't have any ambience or atmosphere because of this. The final battle with General Adams is laughably mundane. I didn't even realise I was about to beat the game, as it was simply treated like business as usual. And that's all I have to say about Killzone. It's quite disappointing. There's a lot of squandered potential concerning the plot, and the gameplay can be fun, but it's let down by some poor level design. I want to like it, I really do, it's right up my street, but I just can't, and I feel terrible for it. There's just so many great ideas, but the quality just isn't there. There was a HD remaster in 2012 that improved the performance and provided clearer visuals. This is the best way to play the game without a doubt. I actually enjoyed my time with it, mostly. Not much they could do about the janky gameplay and bland level design. Sadly, the physical version fetches some of the most ludicrous prices I've ever seen for a 7th generation game. It isn't even worth it. Killzone is not worth over £100. Luckily, the digital version is still available on the PlayStation Store on the PS3, so you might want to snap it up before Sony inevitably decides to erase it from existence. So, Killzone, not up to much. But, Killzone 2? Killzone 2 is awesome. Pretty much a refined version of the first game, this time taking place on the Helghast homeworld. Killzone 2 is one of my favourite FPS games. Definitely my favourite PS3 exclusive. Graphically, it has aged like wine. The intense usage of post-processing effects giving it a highly stylized appearance. It's one of those cinematic games where I think that boosting it up from 30 frames to 60 would cause the cinematic and intentionally heavy and sluggish feel of the game to be lost, though a remaster would still be appreciated. It's a wholly unique game. Not many other games like it. The final gauntlet of enemies is pandemonium, and it's what finally swayed me over to the PS3, dethroning the 360 as my go-to 7th gen console. I like Killzone 2 so much that I got the Steelbook and the Japanese release, because who's gonna stop me? Taxman? My arch enemy John Taxman? I know you've been reading my letters. They're not for you. They're for me! Me! Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah. Killzone 3. I don't care for Killzone 3. Everything I liked about the second game was thrown out the window, replaced by something that looks and plays like other shooters. The gritty and analog feel of the second game is mostly absent. The difficulty is insane. Enemies are as strong as they were in the prior game, but it's as though you're made out of styrofoam. And the save system is garbage. Malcolm McDowell is good in it though.
But sir, the men...
Fuck 'em.
And this brings us to the last mainline Killzone entry, excluding a couple of handhelds. Killzone Shadowfall. Not a lot to say here. I couldn't even bother my arse to finish this game. Virtually all the elements that make up Killzone's iconography is gone. The art direction is far more reminiscent of Horizon, Guerrilla's current franchise. Grit and grunge replaced by clean surfaces and holograms. God, I hate holograms. I won't deny that it does look great from a graphical standpoint, with Shadowfall serving as a launch title for the PS4. That was 11 years ago. The passage of time is scary. Shadowfall is currently the last Killzone game, the franchise seemingly dead. I know the world is getting a bit sick of the current remake craze, but I actually think Killzone might benefit from that kind of treatment. The PS2 was clearly ill-equipped to handle what Guerrilla was aiming to achieve, whereas the PlayStation 5 probably is. Perhaps all of the magazines and online publications touting Killzone as a Halo killer is ultimately what doomed the franchise. Edge even simply asking whether the game was Halo for the PS2. Few judged the game on its own merits. Guerrilla never intended to kill Halo, they simply wanted to make a sci-fi first-person shooter that took a great deal of inspiration from the Second World War. Seems a shame that most people only remember Killzone for that fact, that it was a Halo killer. Ah well, happy birthday Killzone, and remember, glory to Helgen.